In this video, we are going to look at RapidAPI Hub. So this is just a basic website that just has all these APIs people have written to do all these amazing things, and some of them are stupid things, and some of them are silly things, and some of them are probably not appropriate things. But RapidAPI.com is a great place to practice writing some code that pulls from an API. Almost all of them, you can subscribe to some of these and pay money. A lot of them have basic subscriptions that don't cost you anything. And you can make an application, a web application that pulls AJAX requests about just about anything. Weather is a really popular one. And I would be using one of these weather APIs to demonstrate this. But I do that in my Python course. So I'm not going to do weather API for this one. I want to do something different in case you guys took Python for me as well. So in a Python course, we use Python to access a weather API when I teach it. So we're not going to look at weather APIs in this one. What we're going to look at this one, you go through, find ones that you like and experiment with it. But I'm going to go up here. I know the one I want. Programming memes. And look how many there are. I guess they're not all actually programming memes, but we have this programming memes images. I think that's the one I want to use. Let me double check it. And I have already subscribed to it. So when you come here, you may have a test endpoint, but it might say subscribe to test. So I subscribe to this one. And you can do it too if you want to. So let me go to another one so you can see what that looks like. Let's go to this programming memes from Reddit. I don't know what this one. Apparently this one doesn't require a subscription. So we won't go there. Let me see if I can find one that does. I'm not getting any, but some of them will say you need a subscription to try this, which is fine because a lot of them, they're still free subscriptions. You just need to register. I'm registered for this one, Ode. Okay, you can see that I'm subscribed right up here. I can manage my subscription. I can unsubscribe, but I'm using a free subscription. Again, there's a limit to how many times a day I can do this. So if I want to write an application, a mobile application that's pulling funny pictures for people from this API, I can't sell it for too much because, you know, after maybe the first 50 requests of the day, they'll shut it off. If I want to do it and make money off of it, they want to make some money too, and I'll have to use a higher level subscription. Okay. So this programming memes API, there's documentation here that tells us how to use it. That's fantastic. So we have some information. Here's the URL. Here is something called an XRapid API key that we may need to know. It says it's required. Default application is required. Here's the host where we want to go to access it. But the really nice part of this is it gives us a lot of information, and we could take that right over here to Postman and try testing it. And you can see I already have something up here to show you about this one. But over here, they give you code snippets. So they give you example code that you can use. So if I was programming Node.js, this would work great, but I'm not programming Node.js. Look, all these different languages. If I want to do it in Python, if I'm using the request client in Python, here's the code that will get me a response and at least print out the JSON in some form. And then maybe I can access JSON using key value pairs. Turn it into a dictionary in Python. There's a function to do that. And then I can just use key value pairs to pull out information. But we're using JavaScript, so let's go look at JavaScript. Here is sample code using an XML HTTP request. So there's XHR open, and we've seen that before. setting request headers, setting request headers, setting request headers, which are required for this API. We need to set these request headers. They're telling us that over here, these header parameters. But I don't want to use XML HTTP requests, so let me go here. Let's use fetch. And here's some sample code to access this using fetch. So it gives us a URL. It gives us some options. Method is get. Here's the headers we need in order to access this application. Here is some information. This is using await and async, which isn't really the one I wanted to show you today, I don't think. So sample code that we can use and adapt to our site. I am going to show you how to do await and async, but I wasn't going to use that for the demo here. Let's see what else we got. Here's jQuery version. If you're using jQuery, jQuery has some AJAX stuff built into it. Here's Axios. We're not using that either. So I am going to, I guess I'll do the fetch. And I am definitely going to show you how to use await for this in an application, but I am also going to use the fetch API. But what I need to know is some of this information on here. So I need to know these header parameters. I can't do this without these header parameters. And that's different than the keys that we looked at in one of the previous applications. So let's go to Postman and I'll show you what I did. Up here is the get address. We're going to go to that address /v1/memes. And we can see that address came from right here. There's the URL. Okay, so that's the URL we need to hit. And we need to have these headers specified. So in Postman, there is a spot called headers. If you remember before, I think we used parameters and we did key value pairs. This one's going to require headers. So here are the headers that it specified. Right down here, X RapidAPI key, X RapidAPI-host. There's those two headers with values filled in according to the things that they told us that we needed to do in order to access their site. And if I run test endpoint, it will run and I can get information over here. So RapidAPI has some nice visual tools for us to see these things. So you can see each one comes with an image. And it looks like I get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 12. Are they zero numbered? They are. So I get 12 images every time I run this. All right, so I can test that in Postman as well. So I have the URL, I have the two headers. I think there might be a third header, but I don't probably need it. These are the two important ones. And there's my pretty HTML version. It's not what I wanted. There's my pretty JSON version. Here's what it looks like when it actually comes from the server. It's almost unreadable. So we use pretty to look at it. So we have an ID, we have an image key. We have upvotes and downvotes we can actually access if we want to. I'm not going to use that. I'm trying to keep this somewhat simple. So you can come in here and test to make sure you have the required things you need in order to get the responses you want. Tested in Postman. Now let's take a look at the code that I'm using. And I'm doing it slightly different. So I am using fetch API. I'm using the one I demonstrated earlier in one of the previous videos. So I'm still using their constant for the options. It's code that they gave us. If you look back at their website, they gave us, in the code snippets, a constant to specify our options, our method, and the headers that we need. Okay, so they gave us this little piece of code for this constant. Okay, when I fetch, I need to use the URL and I need to use those options. So fetch URL, comma, options. So if you look at my code, let me pull my code back up. I'm fetching using the URL, comma, those options. That's the same command, but I'm just using the .then response, convert the response to JSON, then take the JSON, and I'm calling it this display picture function that I wrote. And it's not a full function because I want you to work with this, maybe on this API, maybe another one. And I'm also doing a display error function. So this is pretty easy. This is a get pictures function. I actually have async up there and I don't need it for this one. Let me make sure I can run this. Index. Open in default browser. Here it is, programming memes. And every time I hit view, it's technically loading 12 more, but right now my sample code I'm only displaying 2. Fix the code or blame the programming language. Oh, that's a common one. And every couple minutes you can hit view and get another 12 images. They don't change constantly. So if I come back to this in a little bit and hit view, it'll pull up two other images, but actually remember there's 12. My code right now is only displaying 2 of them. All right, so let's look at my code. Let's finish looking at my code. Let's look at the JavaScript. So let's go down here. When my document is ready, I'm logging to the console running. I don't need to do that. That was kind of for troubleshooting for me to make sure things were working like they should. I could take that out probably. And I'm calling this function called getPictures. And then that's when somebody presses the view button. But automatically when my page loads, I'm telling the view button to click. So you don't have to load up manually the first time, kind of like we did with astronomy picture of the day. We had to click the button to get that first picture to load. You could have done something like this, which would load it automatically for the user. But then they can hit the button again if they want to try to reload some later. So let's go look at getPictures. GetPictures is a function, okay, and it's the function that's going out and retrieving our data for us. Okay, so it's going out, it's using that constant that we set up with the key and the host number that we needed to have for their website according to their documentation. It's all about reading their documentation. We're fetching from the URL, and I could have built that URL, but I hard-coded it in here. And then I'm passing those options in, so those keys get passed with it. Okay. And then when the response comes back, I'm converting it to JSON. And then I'm taking that JSON and calling display picture. So let's look at display picture. What does it do? Well, I start out by generating some HTML. I'm starting with a div tag, and then I'm going to start concatenating things on. At the end, I'm going to just concatenate on the closing div tag. Everything else is happening right in here. If I have an error, I am displaying an error message that comes from the data in the JSON. Okay. If I have some other kind of code, I'm displaying the message that comes with that code. So these are the two things if it doesn't work. Otherwise, what am I doing? I set up a width, and I had to experiment with that width a little bit. How wide do I want each image to be? Then I'm concatenating on to my HTML an image, and the source is data sub 0. Remember, if we go back and look at that data, it's an array, and I can take the image off of each item in that array because it's an array of images that gets passed. If we go back and look at the code, so this is item 1 or item 0, and I can get its image. Item 1, Sorry about that. Item 1, I can get its image. Item 2, I can get its image. Item 3, I can get its image. Okay, so I'm calling those individual images that are passed as part of this array. So get image 1, which is item 0. Get image 2, which is item number 1. And I could continue this on. I could use, actually the best way to do this would be to do some kind of loop, right? But I just accessed the first 2 images and generated an image tag to display those 2 images. I didn't display any captions or anything else. So I add first image, I concatenate on the second image, I close the div, and then I had a display portion on my index page right here where I updated the HTML in there with the HTML I had just generated. And that's it. That's it. I'm using fetch. Give me a second. I'm going to pause and I'm going to pull up another version of this. Everything is the exact same code, except I'm going to convert this to async and await so you can see the difference, because I have not demonstrated those yet. All right, here is the same program. Everything down here is identical. The difference is my get pictures function. Okay, so this is using async and await, which still uses the promise objects just like the fetch API did. It just writes it in a way that some people prefer. This method actually came out after the fetch API. I like the .thens and the .catches. And that's the way I prefer to do it, but this is another way you can do it. So let's talk about some differences in this function. First, it's an asynchronous function. So is the fetch API. It is also an asynchronous function, but we're writing this this version is a more traditional way to write the exact same thing. But in this way, we have to specify first that this is an async function, because we're still calling fetch. We're still calling fetch. We're still passing the URL and the options like we did before. But this time, rather than use the string of .then, and .catch, we're actually taking the response that comes back and storing it in a variable. Okay, so we're going and getting this object, storing it in this variable called response. Then we're going to take our response and call .json to convert it to .json. Okay, and these are both asynchronous things, so they both have the keyword await. In order to use await here, we had to tell it that this is an asynchronous function up here. Okay. In fetch API, we didn't have to do that. So await.response JSON, and then we store the data. It comes back in this thing called data, and then we call display picture with data, which is exactly what happened in our other version. Let me see if I can put these side by side to show you the difference. Some people prefer this way. Some people prefer, and this is the newer way, that because some people thought the other way was more difficult from what I've read. So what's the difference here? We're getting a response. Here we're getting a response. Okay. We're converting it to JSON. Here we're converting it to JSON. And then finally, we're calling display picture, and here we're calling display picture. This is just a little bit more traditional for newer coders that might like it. Again, I kind of prefer to write it this way. I see a lot more people writing things that way, even though this using async and await are a little bit newer for asynchronous functions. Okay. So if you've taken Java and done threading or anything like that, where things are running asynchronously, you'll see await in there as well. So both of these are doing the identical thing. This one we have to specify that it's running asynchronously. The fetch API is running asynchronously. It just depends on whether you want to keep these intermediate variables in there. Feel free to do it either way. If you remember the code that I got off of RapidAPI, it actually showed us the way to do it this way. I wrote it this way first, and then I converted it to this to do a demonstration for you. That's the nice part about most APIs. They usually give you demo code to show you a sample way of how to access their server. All right. I think that's all I'm going to cover for this chapter. There is more data in the, there is more information in the book. They go on a lot deeper in it than this. But for what I'm going to have you do, I'll talk about it in the next video. I'm going to talk about the assignment. And this will be your last assignment of the semester. And I'll see you in the next video.